welcome to everyone who is just joining us. I know that John has dropped the link in the chat a few times for the session materials. So if you haven't checked those out already, please do. And also just another reminder, if you're joining from the website, your Zoom name will say Richard Taylor. So if you wouldn't mind to just hover over your own box there on your screen and click the three dots, you can rename yourself so that we know who you are. And if you feel comfortable in a minute when we get started, just turning on your camera so we can see your face, that'd be awesome. But if not, we understand that too. And we will get started in just a few minutes. Hey, Catherine.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Oh, be glad when today's over.
Big day.
Did you get some rest last night?
Eventually, yeah, I did. It probably looks like I needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm feeling nice and refreshed today, and I've already had two or three cups of coffee, so that's good. Morning, Bethany.
Good morning.
Good morning, Bethany. Brooke, what did you do with your puppy?
Sorry, I was on mute. She's hanging out with Matt today. He's off work, so hopefully he'll.
I begged Scotty to stay home from the golf course and take care of him. I begged him because sometimes he just gets crazy when I'm on the computer, like jealous. But nope. Scotty said, I need to play golf today.
Necessity. Well, if she goes crazy, we will understand that. It looks like we're rolling into 9 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. Just want to welcome everyone again. Good morning. Thanks for being here with us today. John has dropped the link again in the chat box to the resources page if you need to go there and just grab our session resources for today. And we'll just go ahead and get started. Oh, just another reminder, all of you out there who joined from the website, your name will say Richard Taylor. So if you just want to hover over your box and click the three dots, you can rename yourself so that we know who we are interacting with today. That would be awesome. Thank you. And we'll go ahead and get started. So first, we'll be using Zoom today. I know that probably none of us are strangers to Zoom at this point. We will ask that you just please keep yourself on mute just to minimize sound, background noise. We are expecting kind of a large crowd today, so just to be respectful of that. And we'll be using the chat to drop some links, to ask questions, interact. So you'll find that down at the bottom of your screen. And again, our session materials link has been posted in the chat. You can see the schedule of sessions or the session materials page for resources. Just find the session that you're in, which is SEL in your curriculum, and the appropriate day and time, which is, I just have to look myself. Today is June the 7th and it is 9 a.m. So that 9 a.m. session on June the 7th, you'll view the materials and you'll be able to download slides and anything else that Tracy has dropped there for you. And we're excited to have you joining us today for the Rural Life Virtual Summer Institute. Welcome to Practical SEL, found in your ELA curriculum. I knew I didn't have that entire title correct. My name is Brooke Drennan, and I will be your session host today. I'm here just to support our presenter, who I will introduce shortly, offer you technical assistance, as well as share the session evaluation and certificate information at the end of the session. So please don't hesitate to use the chat to ask questions or request technical support. I'd love to help you out and make sure that you're not frustrated today as we're moving through the session. So just send a message in the chat, send me a direct message if you're having any problems. And at this time, I'd like to introduce to you our session presenter, Dr. Tracy Ballou.
Morning, everybody, and thank you guys for being here. I hope everybody's had their coffee. I've had probably way too much coffee because I got up early to make sure all this was set up, but thank God for Brooke. She helps keep things rolling. So she is, she's been a help to me as far as the tech and just the introductions and everything. So we will just kind of get started here, but I wanted to say we appreciate you all being here and we appreciate what you do. So I hope you guys have a great summer in store, some relaxation. And after the year we've had, everybody needs it and we appreciate it. So just to talk a little bit about our learning space today, we do want you to feel comfortable speaking, chatting with us. So you'll probably be navigating several different tabs. So we will throw links into the chat, you'll click on that, and then you'll have to go back to your Zoom screen to see the presentation. So just kind of get familiar with that, or if you're like me, then you may have 2 or 3 devices going right now. So there'll be opportunities to share out. You can do that either by your mic or in the chat box. So please feel free, like a classroom, we would want our students to respond to us. So feel free to do that, and hopefully we'll have some fun and wrap this up in a little over an hour. But again, thank you all for being with us. So today, like Brooke said, practical SEL. So our learning objectives today are, during this workshop, we want to explore the CASEL framework and its effect on academics. And if you don't already know what that is, that's okay, because we're going to look at it today. Analyze our own classrooms and our curriculum for opportunities where we can invite or explicitly teach SEL practices. And then collaborate with other teachers and discuss what it looks like in their curriculum or what supporting SEL looks like in their classroom. Because that's the best way to pick up tips is, right? Beg, borrow, and steal from other teachers who have been there and have done it. And so again, we appreciate you all being here, but these are just today's objectives. And my name's Tracy. Feel free to do a chat question or anything you need. And if you need us to slow down, stop, whatever it is, you just let us know and we'll do so, okay? So I kind of wanted to give a little testimony. We're not in church, but I'm going to testify. So I'll be honest with you. I taught high school English for years. And what I used to think that when people talked about SEL, that it was a little bit of like existential fluff, that it may not have been the actual curriculum and it may not have been actually related to what I did. However, in the past few years, I've actually learned and read several studies that social emotional learning has improved students' performance in the classroom, and it helps them achieve the difficult things and overcome barriers in order to reach those difficult things like complex texts. So then now kind of what I now believe is that it is a tool that we can utilize. Now, it doesn't have to be our only forefront, because if we only use that, then of course we're limiting our other resources like our curriculum. But it is something that can be integrated into our normal everyday lessons, and that it helps our students improve the capacity for learning. It helps them retain more, and it helps them better able to connect and or hang their hat on some of those complex texts that we are going to be utilizing in these new high quality curriculums. So I just kind of wanted to take a moment and give my little background and say that if you are a little bit on the side of, oh, this is kind of, I'm not real sure where I was there. I was absolutely there also. So I do not advocate you taking over your entire curriculum with SEL. However, I do advocate integrating. So that being said, that's just my little testimony there about that. So we are happy to have you, and we would like to know who we have joining us. So again, I'm Tracy. I taught secondary ELA for years, and then I was an administrator for a few years, and now I'm a rural life literacy coach. So we would love for you all to kind of introduce yourself in the chat box. Any grade level, subject material, we'd love to see it. And particularly if you are an ELA teacher, we would love to hear which curriculum your school has adopted. And that will kind of help us later on, because we will get into more specifics later on about our curriculums. So I see several chats already pouring in. Thank you. Cosby, Chucky Doke, and we have some amplifies. So I also have another high school ELA teacher here. Yes, thank you. And it's so nice to meet you all, and we're glad to have you here with us. So we're just going to take a minute and let kind of the chats come through so that we know. It looks like we're running the entire gamut. We have some elementary people, and then we have all the way to high school. We have different subject levels. And we have several amplifies. Okay, perfect. While those continue to come on in, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of show us a little preview of what we're going to be discussing today. And this guy with the crazy hair, he cracks me up every time I see his picture. But basically, he's going to explain to us how research shows that SEL in students, and basically by SEL, when I say that, I kind of mean like a well-roundedness in a student. It improves their performance. So we're going to just take a minute, and you guys continue putting those in the chat and introducing yourself. Thank you so much. We have some more of the elementary ed, so we have the entire gamut. And this is applicable, just FYI, this is applicable to all grade levels. And this is applicable to all students. It's never too far gone, and it's never too early to start kind of norming some of these things. So we will watch our little crazy hair man here just for a moment, and he will talk to us about the research behind SEL and improved performance.
Hi, I'm Sam from Panorama. Welcome to Research Minute, where we bring you the latest findings from our national data set so that you can better build schools and support students. Today we're talking about the relationship between social emotional learning, or SEL, and the traditional metrics of student success: attendance, behavior, and course performance, also known as the ABCs. We know from research that attendance, behavior, course performance, and assessments are powerful indicators of whether a student is on track for graduation. We also know that SEL variables of motivation, self-regulation, and social connection are as or more important than cognitive ability for success in school and life. As researchers and educators, our challenge now is to figure out how to put these data together. How can the ABCs and SEL be combined into whole child measurement, effective early warning systems, and holistic student support? So what exactly are those relationships? How does SEL relate to attendance, behavior, and course performance? To answer this question, we analyzed data from over 100,000 students from nearly 200 schools across the country. Here are 3 key findings we want to share with you. First, we found that SEL has significant positive correlations with traditional metrics of student success. This means that students with higher SEL usually have better grades, assessment scores, behavior, and attendance than students with lower SEL. Second, we found that these correlations vary meaningfully in their size. They range from relatively small in the case of attendance to relatively large in the case of GPA. Compared to kids with low SEL, kids with high SEL are twice as likely to have above average grades, 60% less likely to have 1 or more behavior incidents over the course of a year, and half as likely to be chronically absent. Finally, relationships between SEL skills and the ABCs are not entirely constant. They change across elementary, middle, and high school. For attendance, the correlations peak in high school, perhaps because as kids grow up, they have more control over their attendance. For grades, behavior, and assessments, however, the correlations with SEL peak in middle school. So not only is middle school a challenging time for kids socially and emotionally, it's also the time when students' social emotional functioning is most closely linked to their academic performance. So to recap, SEL variables have significant positive correlations with the ABCs. SEL correlates most with grades and least with attendance. And these SEL ABC correlations vary meaningfully across school levels. Finally, one important note. We've been talking about SEL in a pretty generic way, and there is value in doing that. But SEL is not monolithic. Self-regulatory facets such as emotion regulation are not the same as more social facets like belonging. For more details on what we shared today, check out our research brief, link below. We want to hear how you support students by connecting SEL with the ABCs. Email us at research@panoramaed.com with your ideas or questions, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, so a couple things I wanted to point out that he mentioned, and you probably caught these. Students with a high SEL are 2 times as likely to have above average grades. 60% of students with a high SEL, and again, that's just kind of what I consider a well-roundedness, they are 60% less likely to have behavior incidents each year at school. And they are half as likely to be chronically absent. And if you'll notice, and we'll go on to the next slide and I'll show you the visual that he did, but it seems as if we have a particular peak in middle school. Now, our rural life work deals specifically with middle school, but not everybody here does. And you'll notice it continues to increase other than attendance, like he mentioned, but it continues to increase. But what a pivotal time that middle school is when grades, course performance, and GPA all peak at that particular moment. And that, of course, as we all know, that's the time where we're developing, we're kind of figuring out who we are and what we want to be and how we want to perform in school and so on. So those are some pivotal years. And I would also argue leading up to those years and the years beyond it. But this may or may not be kind of new to you. So I kind of wanted to back up and talk about generally what is SEL. So let's kind of back up and start at the beginning. If you were new to it, like I was a few years ago, this comes directly from the CASEL framework. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire knowledge, skills, attitudes, and develop healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, and establish and maintain supporting relationships, and make responsible, caring decisions. I mean, that sounds like what we want for all of our particular children, like our personal children, as well as our students. So in my mind, it's simply teaching our students, children, and even peers sometimes to be well-rounded, responsible citizens and responsible feelings. So I don't want you to get this misunderstanding that I had years ago that SEL only deals with emotions. It actually has several facets, and the Castle 5 core competencies are listed here for us. So we have self-awareness, self-management. So both of those obviously have to deal with self. Like if we're talking in ELA terms, that would be man versus self, right? You know, and then social awareness and relationship skills are the looking out towards the world, and responsible decision making. I mean, who doesn't want that for their students? So you'll notice there are rings around this little pie graph here in the corner. So the 5 competencies are in the middle, and it all relates to social emotional learning. However, there are rings: communities, family, caregivers, schools, classrooms. So the darkest blue right here is kind of where we're going to be hanging out today, because that's within our realm of influence, right? Our classrooms are within our realm of influence. So that's where we'll be talking today. And we will dive into the framework on the next slide. Brooke will drop you a link to the Castle framework, which, by the way, if you're interested in the study that video contained, Bethany dropped a link in the chat, but also at the end of our slideshow, you'll see several resources listed. Those slides are uploaded to the materials on the VSI page, the same page through which you joined today. And you can go to those slides, and it's in a PDF form, but the very last, maybe the third to last slide has all of our resources there. So our link to the Castle framework is coming, and what we are going to do is kind of explore the framework in itself, because what exactly is self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making? I mean, we all kind of have our own definition of those, but what we want to know is, are there specific activities and examples of those? And if you'll click on the link to the Castle framework, it will absolutely take you to those. On the second page, and if someone could give us kind of a thumbs up that yes, you're able to access that. On the second page, the first page is what you see right here. You'll see the little circle. The second page gives you each 5 with a description. And I would like us to just take a few minutes of quiet time to read through the descriptions, because, thank you, Scott, I see your thumbs up in the chat. We are going to discuss that on a Padlet on the next slide in a little bit. So what we're going to do is just take a few minutes of quiet time, read through each of the descriptions, specifically page 2. And then on page 2, we're going to be looking for some things that stand out to us. What's a standout? What's something that resonates with you? It could be a phrase. It could be just one word. And then we'll go into our Padlet. But for just now, I'll be quiet and give you guys 2 minutes to read through each of the 5 descriptions on page 2 of the PDF. Okay, so now if you would, you have a couple different options. Brooke will drop the Padlet link, but if you'd rather do it on something different and not the same device on which you're already working with the Zoom, you could probably take your phone and or tablet, scan the QR code in your pictures, and then do it that way. And that way it doesn't change the screen you're on. So she has dropped that Padlet and we will go there. But before we do, we want you to choose a couple words or phrases that stood out. So you're looking for standouts to you. But to take that one step further, what might we see or witness or hear or experience if that standout were fully present in our room? So for example, somebody's already mentioned decision making. What might we see, hear, and experience if that were fully realized in our classrooms, decision making? And then of course, if you are familiar with Padlet, you can heart other people's, you can respond to other people's posts. Very similar to social media, but it's all on one collaborative board. So that's going to be our just think aloud space, if you will. So again, you're looking for standouts and you're going to post what stood out to you and what might that look like. And I've even posted an example in there for you, something that I thought was applicable when I went through it. And I will try to bump over to our Padlet here. You may need to refresh because there are so many people on here. After people start posting, you may just kind of need to refresh and or add a comment, reply to somebody else. But basically what we're looking for here are in the 5 descriptions. What would it look like in our classroom? So it looks like some of you are now getting to where you're commenting on others and or giving the heart. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Padlet, you can kind of give it a thumbs up, thumbs down when you're making the board, or I chose heart because I figured we wanted to just like let other people know that, yeah, I resonate with what you're thinking. But what we would love is for you all to continue if you have not been able to post yet. But if we could get 2 or 3 people who would like to share out something that resonated with them. And I see so many great examples on here of what it would look like in our classrooms. So you don't have to raise your hand. If you want to, you can. But if you would like to share out in the chat what resonated with you and how it would look in your classroom if that were something that were fully realized. Okay, so no volunteers yet, but I do want you guys to chime in. If you want to unmute and just start, like, for example, somebody mentioned taking others' perspectives. They have several comments and several likes. So if you kind of wanted to talk to us, whoever posted the taking others' perspectives, if you wanted to kind of talk us through how you would envision that looking in your classroom, that would be wonderful.
Tracy?
Yep.
I commented on some of the perspective original comments on here. And one thing as a coach that I had noticed when I work with social studies teachers, this was kind of new to me, but the perspective taking assignments, and that's something that I think Harvey Silvers, he talks a lot about in design thinking and some of his other texts. But I've seen social studies teachers do an excellent job of connecting that idea of, walking around in somebody else's shoes and make a real specific academic connection to it. Like, that's literally the assignment. They will read like a primary document, a piece of text, and then they will write as though they are that person in that historical context. And like I'd mentioned, the teachers, the social studies teachers that I've worked with, they've really done an excellent job of that and have really helped me see some connections there. And I think Brooke may have commented on one of those too, about literature being a really good opportunity maybe to build empathy.
Yeah, I appreciated you mentioning social studies because my brain just automatically goes to ELA a lot of times. So I just think about the impact that reading just a variety of perspectives can have on students, but also, yes, great opportunities in other classes as well, such as social studies, to take those different perspectives. I've seen some great lessons with that as well.
And Tracy, making those connections into other subjects is just huge, because maybe, as we know how students learn in different ways, maybe they're a math person, maybe they love their science or whatever. So if we, through SEL, good SEL practice, you can help make connections and maybe hit on a student's passion.
I love it. I love the idea of hitting on a student's passion. Yes. And how much more involved can we ask a student to be than to be passionate about what they're working on? That's excellent. Thank you all. I was thinking Atticus Finch also, Candace, when you said that. That's who my mind did not go to social studies. I was automatically thinking Atticus Finch, but that's kind of my go-to. So that's one of the hazards of having taught ELA for years, right? So that's, does anybody else kind of want to chime in? And we've got some recognizing strengths in others. Responsible decision-making was listed several times. Recognizing how critical thinking skills are useful both in and out of school. So if anybody would like to unmute and talk about that, we would be glad to chat with you.
I was the one who posted about the seeing others' perspectives. I teach art in a middle school setting, and I see all the time where it's difficult for middle school students to see other perspectives. And I want to find ways in the art room to get them to recognize that others do have different perspectives. We come from different places, everyone, and we see things differently. And so my goal is to be able to help them see other perspectives.
Thank you, Pamela. And you got a hands up from Catherine. You got so absolutely. So art, perspectives takes on both a literal and a figurative meaning for you, doesn't it, Pamela? So thank you. And art, yes, like Brooke said, art's an excellent way to do that, about everybody can be looking at the same object, but seeing completely different things. So thank you all for sharing. And if anybody still wants to share, please feel free. And this board will still be available to you. Again, if you go back to the materials and just kind of click on there, if you wanted to read through some of the other comments. And I like the idea about accountable talks here. They didn't expand on that, but there are so many good things that are found in those descriptions that I would have missed had I not read the descriptions and had I just seen the 5 competencies titles. So I learned a lot myself by going back into the framework and kind of reading through the descriptions. And again, we're focusing today on the classroom setting because we can't necessarily control the family and the community. But that being said, we can control what happens in our classroom and the norms that we set in our classroom. So I will go back to, our slideshow here. And so this is a resource that somebody recently sent me. 2 great resources from Benson. One was an article published in the ASCD magazine, and then another one is the actual book, which you see a copy of right here. But basically, he advocates implementing SEL in each and every lesson every day. And he does not do this by making it silly. He makes it a norm, a normalcy for his students. So for example, he has a wonderful example in the article. Both of these, both the link to the book and the link to the article are in our resource page. Both of those, he mentions getting his students to self-advocate from day one. So for example, he starts his lesson with, is there something that you need today to make this lesson successful, because you have 30 seconds to get it and to do it and or ask me a question and to ask your neighbor a question or to sharpen your pencil. And he said it felt strange and it felt really odd at first, but after he got the students into that and he would applaud them, he would say, thank you for self-advocating. Thank you for allowing yourself the time to get ready so that you can be more successful in this lesson. He said, then once it became a normal thing to them, he no longer had to explicitly state it. But he does warn us that at the beginning, everything needs to be explicit. And for example, I thought of something yesterday when I was talking with Brooke. When my personal children were little, I had to remind them, hey, clear your plate, take your plate to the sink, put your fork in the dishwasher, that kind of thing, but after that becomes a norm, that's just implicit. You no longer have to explicitly say it. But he warns us that SEL will be overlooked if we are not explicit with it. And especially for some of you elementary teachers, you know that that's so true. If they know and are normed what time lunch is and when to get their Germex, then they are lined up in alphabetical order, getting their Germex at 10:22 because they know it's almost time for those kindergartners to walk to the lunchroom. So, that's a norming thing, and it's explicit rather than implied. He also suggests start small. Don't start with the entirety of it. Start with something small that will help your students improve as a member of the community. Maybe find a lesson plan, which is what we'll do here in a minute, but find a lesson plan and find one spot in it that's where a spot where you could make something explicitly SEL, explicitly just for their social and emotional growth. So bottom line, intentional, not implied, explicit, so that way they don't have to infer it. You've said it directly. So again, that's going to feel strange, but it will come around. And he says that after he did that for a couple weeks with his students, he no longer had to invite them to do so. They did it automatically. So what does this have to do with all of our new curriculum? And I am not leaving anybody out. I'm just throwing some of examples of new curriculum that has been adopted here. Guidebooks, Amplify, and Pearson or Savas. Those are just some of the few that we've heard of, but by all means, some of you are art teachers, science teachers, social studies teachers, primary school teachers, special ed teachers. So this may or may not necessarily be a curriculum that you are using, but it doesn't mean that it's not already in your curriculum and in your books. So how can we consider what we do have in front of us instead of adding a total extra curriculum, which some SEL curriculums are that way. It's a total extra program that the school has to purchase to add into what they already do. How could we rather use what we have and find moments and find spots each day to connect with a student on a social emotional level, and or have the student connect on a social emotional level with the content that they are using and that they are maybe struggling with, maybe excelling in, but what's something that could help, like I said before, hang their hat on that knowledge. So just kind of keep these 3 questions in mind, and then we will go forward to our next collaborative activity. But how can we utilize this within our new curriculum without adding an outside program? Can we find specific spots to incorporate some of these self-actualizing skills? And then how do these skills help make our complex texts and or complex materials more approachable for students, something on which to hang their hat? So if you have a very difficult physics lesson, what is something that you could probably do to incorporate something that would help them relate to that and or remember that lesson, even though it was super difficult, without tuning out, something that you could kind of help connect them. Yes, Candace, yes, I like that. A lot of teachers use this as an opener, as a bell ringer. And Candace has put something in the chat here, like a goal you've set this week, and students revisit it later in the context of the text that they were reading. So that's applicable outside of ELA also, I think. Don't you? I feel like that would be applicable in any sense if we begin the class and or the lesson, the difficult lesson that way, allowing students to make a connection and then revisiting that, because that also helps with their own self-assessment. Have I met my goal? Have I not met my goal? What do I need to do? It's my self-management, right? What do I need to do in order to get to that goal? And so that's incorporating several of those different SEL skills. So with these 3 in mind, how can we utilize this within our new curriculum? How can we find specific spots to incorporate some of these? And how do we use these skills to help make our complex texts and or complex lessons more approachable for students? So this is just, again, I was a self-admitted ELA teacher, so I used Amplify here as an example. So I chose Red Scarf Girl, 7th grade, because that's a complex text. It's dealing with cultural shifts, political unrest. In addition, it has some high-level vocabulary and very emotional, difficult themes for 7th graders. So thinking about the 3 guiding questions that we saw on the last slide, these are just a few spots that I noticed I could point out and have a good discussion with the kids about self-awareness, because I noticed personal and cultural linguistic assets, both in the text and also making the kids aware of their own. Self-management, personal, meaning in themselves, but the collective agency, that of the class and or in Red Scarf Girl, that of the community or that of the family. So there are those connections. Social awareness, definitely, like we talked about earlier, walking a mile in somebody else's shoes, empathy and compassion. That is a huge talking point in this particular one story out of the entire curriculum for the whole year. Relationship skills, cultural competency. That's something that I noticed that, yeah, let me go back here. Sorry, that's something that I noticed. Cultural competency, and then responsible decision-making, community and institutional impacts. So obviously that's not an exhaustive list. You could probably hit everything that you found in that SEL Castle framework. But if you just wanted to purposefully find 1 or 2 of the possibilities where you could make a point to throw in some SEL discussions with your students and have them connect with more difficult texts and or more difficult concepts, this is just one example. So Brooke the other Brooke Brooke Davenport says, she thought of Red Scarf Girl and A Raisin in the Sun. Yes, both part of the 7th grade curriculum when she was reading the framework. Absolutely. Both expose students to worlds that are maybe not their own, but also allow them to see things through somebody else's eyes. But in this case, in the young girl, it also allows them to feel her disappointment and her successes when she is chosen by, and I won't give the entire story away, but when she is chosen for a great opportunity, but then she goes home and shares it with the family, and then she realizes it's not such a great opportunity. That's a point where the students could totally connect with that. And oh, I had an idea about that when I had blah 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 happen. So that's something that's happened in everybody's life that they could connect with. So, and Brooke Drinnen says she has some general routines and aspects of Amplify, such as the collaboration built into so many lessons. Those are great opportunities to teach and model relationship skills. Absolutely. I love the fact that new curriculums force the students to share around the room, which used to be something kind of like awkward and intimidating, but they have built it in such small little pieces, and they've made it a norm that when they turn and talk to their partner, or they turn and tell the teacher, and then their partner responds, here's what I liked about your writing. It's some of those positive relationship skills that they may not have gotten in just the lecture only based type classes. So that's absolutely something built into these new curriculums. So moving on, this was just my example. This is Red Scarf Girl. It's not necessarily one that you have to choose. It's just an example that I chose because it popped into my head. And Raisin in the Sun, like you said, is wonderful. So now we are going to go to our next collaborative activity. It's your turn now. So we actually have heard from teachers this year, like, hey, give us some time to think, give us some space to plan together, give us some, a moment to collaborate. So with all that being said, we want to take a few minutes of just quiet time. It's going to be awkward because Zoom quiet is awkward. It's not like classroom quiet. So we're going to take a few minutes of quiet time. And I want you to think specifically about what you teach, whether that's kindergarten and you're teaching phonics, hi-hat, whatever it is, whether that's high school physics, whether that's art to middle schoolers, or somewhere in between, whether you're the band teacher or you're the principal. But we want to take a few moments to just think about what it is that we're teaching, and or where are the spots that we can add some of the social emotional learning that the kids need to understand in order to excel in school, but also to better understand those difficult concepts. So we will give you some quiet time, but in the meantime, Brooke will be dropping a link to our collaborative Google Doc. If you happen to be an ELA teacher, you can choose the column that applies to you. If you do not happen to be an ELA teacher, just choose the last one. Okay, and the last one is where you can share opportunities either in your own curriculum, or they may be things that you were already doing. So it may be opportunities that you say, hey, here's how I do it. I incorporate this every day, like Candace said, as a bell ring, or I incorporate it every day as part of my my exit ticket. Not only assesses what they've learned, but it also assesses their feelings that day and how they're feeling about the lesson and things like that. So what we want to do is give teachers time to, one, work together, think about your own curriculum and how to implement this without having to buy one more additional thing and one more additional program, because we all know in education, our programs are constantly coming in. New programs are constantly coming in. So if we could just utilize what we have and connect with our kids on a social emotional level, and or connect them to the text on a social emotional level. So that's kind of what this is all about. So again, I've talked you to death. I'm going to be quiet for some time. Brooke's going to drop the link to the Google Doc, but feel free, take 5 minutes of quiet time, and or if you need a bathroom break, now's a great time to do it. And you can come back and post some of your thoughts. And if we need more cells in this Google Doc, we will add more cells, no problem. But then we would like to kind of come back together, share and collaborate. So if you have a question like, hey, who posted this in the purple box? I have a question about that. We can have a few minutes left to do that. Okay, so we will take about 5 minutes of quiet time to look around and think about our curriculum, and then 5 or 10, depending upon how long we need, to respond in the Google Doc. And if you haven't, just try to read through some of the responses. We have several insightful ELA texts mentioned and the connections that we can make. But there are also some other opportunities and subjects that were mentioned, like earlier somebody mentioned the art perspective. So if you'll take just a few minutes and kind of read through some of the suggestions here, and or it may lead you to another opportunity that you can think of. Hey, I could do social emotional learning as applied to what have you. Again, like even as a band director, there's a lot of SEL that has to go on in those big bands, you know, so this is not just an ELA thing, but if you can find opportunities to apply it explicitly where it's practical, as opposed to it just being an assessment of somebody's feeling. Because if you ask somebody, how are you feeling? They may just say fine and move on. And they may not actually tell you, well, I'm struggling with this particular piece because it makes me feel fill in the blank. So we see some people commenting here. Feel free to comment to each other also. This is really just our collaborative space. If you want to add a new column and or a new row, also feel free to do that. I like the opportunity that somebody took to mention the virtual learners this year. How pivotal were these SEL moments for our virtual learners who had no interaction with the teacher in the classroom? So I appreciate whoever put that in there, a daily check-in, and it was pivotal for remote learning. And it's something that allows them to connect with that class because they may have been, some of our students were home alone all day long. And the only thing they saw was a laptop, like what I'm doing right now. But that was their only interaction with their teacher. So after a year like this, I really do think that we have realized that not only was SEL also important beforehand, but even now more so. And so Megan's commenting, she used Google Forms. Thank you. I'm going to move my little picture boxes so that I can read your. So I've used Google Forms to do this both in person and online. Yes. It's a wonderful opportunity to make a connection and to allow them to reach back out to you because it opens that door for them. So if anybody would like to come off of mute and just respond to some of what they either read and or wrote themselves, we'd love to just chit chat with about. We've got a few minutes left where we can just kind of chit chat, collaborate, and or keep adding to our Google Doc if we want to, before we need to start wrapping things up. So I like to learn from you all too. And so I'm glad I have access to this doc, and I'm gonna look back at it for some opportunities that I can incorporate SEL. Okay, so would anybody like to kind of come off mute and share? If not, like, I don't want to rush you, but I also don't want to put you on the spot by voluntolding you, so. This is a pretty quick run through, but I want you all to know that, as with myself, this is my own experience. It took me a while. It was not something that I could add immediately into. I had to do baby steps, and or even when I did, I realized what worked with my high schoolers and what did not. So if you're on the other end and you have kindergarten and first grade, you'll realize what works with them, what they're capable of, and what maybe needs to come at the end of the year rather than at the beginning. So some of it's just a learning process for us. But if anybody would like to share out, we have several Raisin in the Sun comments on here. So if you guys want to share out about that, that'd be great.
Tracy, this is more of a general comment, but listening to you reflect there made me think in terms of a kind of a baby step, that so many of the, our curricular questions that are written just looked at through the window of one of these 5 frameworks, and just being aware as an educator that I could kind of lean into that question with just this type of explicitness that you're talking about, or surface some additional thinking that's really tied to the SEL component could be a wonderful way to start. It's not about adding to your curriculum. It's just about looking at it through this new lens and just being a little bit more explicit with students about how they take that question that was, the way it was written in the curriculum, and view it from the perspective of one of those 5 elements of the SEL framework.
And I think that's good for life, don't you? I mean, some ways that this is, okay, how is this teaching me to be a better person in this particular instance? How is this teaching me to be a better person in this particular? I mean, I've had several of those throughout my lifetime. So
well, I just think, about especially in ELA, let's say when you're in a narrative and you have 2 characters interacting. I mean, the question could very much be, how are these characters interacting? What's the evidence from the text that they have such and such feelings, or that this, action then caused this result? All of that through that lens of SEL about, social awareness, our relationships, our decision-making, its impact on others. All of that is straight up in our narrative. It's just having that awareness as an educator and maybe servicing that in that classroom in that way, in that more explicit way, as you talked about, that really just makes that tiny shift that means so much in terms of how SEL impacts students in the ways that the research showed us earlier in the session.
Absolutely. And it's, like we said before, it's built into these curriculums. It's there. We just have to make it more obvious, if you will. And sometimes we just need to straight out ask the question that it's implying, So I agree wholeheartedly. I like also, I wanted to comment about the art and the ELA Weissel, his speech, and that's even a connection to, that's a art, an English, a history. That's a connection across the board there. And even the science, there are so many things that we could do with some of these connections that are cross-curricular even, and not only limited to our ELA curriculums. So would anybody else like to share?
Hey, Tracy.
Go ahead.
This might be something that you address here in just a few minutes as a closure, but I was kind of, and this kind of parallels what Bethany was saying just a minute ago. I was just thinking about like how practically to use this for myself. So like, you remember like back in the day when your first few years teacher, you have your standards in front of you and you're like, you keep looking back at them. I hope, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing here? So I'm thinking one thing I might do this next month as I do a little bit of curricular work is I think I might just have like a physical copy of that CASEL framework as I'm looking into the curriculum. And then, so if it's not super explicit or obvious to me, my eye can keep going back to that graphic so that maybe I'm kind of reminded like, oh, this is an instance when we can address this. So I think that might be like a practical change that I make here in the next couple of weeks as I review curriculum.
I love it. I love it. And that's something that if we keep it in front of our face, we're more apt to use it. In fact, the book that I mentioned earlier, Jeffrey Benson, he talks about using his standards, like you said, the student will be able to, and he uses his SWABATs, as we call them, to connect to SEL every day before he even gets going. And he makes that his, and then that way he doesn't forget, he makes it his point of the day to connect his SEL to his students will be able to. So anytime we keep something in front of us, I think that's a great idea, or even just a copy of it in our plan book. And it's not to add, again, I want to go back to my testifying moment at the beginning. It's not to add fluff. It is to add a connection with the students and the lesson, something on which that they can hang their hat per se, and or remember the lesson, remember the difficulty, remember the overcoming, remember, so there are so many different avenues that this could take, but boils down to a lot of relationship building, like several of you have mentioned. So Candace, I think that's a great practical tip. If we keep it in front of our head, then we will more likely be able to incorporate it into our daily lessons. So that kind of, if you guys want to keep on working on this particular document, feel free. Again, this is also linked in our resource. I've left everything wide open, so you can still go back and look at the Padlet. You can still go back and look at the Google Doc, and you can still go back and look at all of the references that we've made today. If you are interested in that Jeffrey Benson book, there is a free chapter online. The first chapter is online, and that I've given you the link for that. But then after that, it's a new book. So you'd have to, maybe buy a Kindle version or something. But I like how his are practical steps, and it's not necessarily an addition to something he's doing. He's just incorporating it into and making it more obvious, like Bethany mentioned earlier, something that's already in there. He's just making it a little bit more obvious. So I'm going to open it up if anybody has questions, and I will navigate back to our slideshow. And if you have questions, please, well, I guess I need to sign in. Love that. So yes, it's me. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and or just come off mute and ask. And thank you for being with me while my technology is not working, because that's part of this year, right? That's our COVID year right there in a nutshell. So here we go. This is the resource page that I have mentioned like numerous times, but two of the Benson ones that I mentioned. And if you're just still a little bit confused about SEL and how, if those descriptions weren't particularly enough, you can click on the What is SEL link, and it's a different article. It doesn't just bring you back to the framework, but it's an article explaining the framework and how it works in schools. If you are interested in the video that we saw earlier and how attendance, behavior, and course performance relate to SEL and are improved by SEL, that link is here also.
Tracy, I think Castle has so many good resources on there. Something I found last summer was just kind of like a teacher self-reflection. So you could kind of assess where you are with SEL. And if I can find that real quick, I'll drop the link there too. But it's just something not for evaluation purposes or anything like that, but just for a teacher to self-reflect and see kind of where they are with incorporating SEL and where they want to go. So I know I'm always trying to personally improve. So just thinking about goal setting, that could be helpful.
I love it. Yes, thank you. So if you can get that link and drop it in, and if she cannot, then we can add that to the materials folder, which you guys can access through the VSI page. We can put that in a Google Doc in the materials folder. So keep in mind, also the Rural Life VSI page is linked here if you need to click on and just have it saved. But I assume that's how most of you got into your session today. So again, we appreciate you being here with us. Early morning, Monday, summertime. And then as Brooke is looking through that, she will drop the link for some of the SEL resources. This is by far just a tip of the iceberg with social emotional learning and the Castle framework. But we wanted to let you know we appreciate your time. We appreciate you being here with us. And we have, thank you, Bethany, has dropped the VSI website link again. But we also would love for you all to take our little 1-minute survey. It allows us to kind of reflect on your thoughts of the session. And we are looking to improve. So we really do read the feedback. And you will receive a certificate of participation and or attendance for the session. And that will be automatically emailed to you after you complete the evaluative form. And Brooke has just copied and pasted CASEL assessment, and it's school guide CASEL assessment resources in the classroom kind of link there. If you want to quickly click on that and have that tab open, that way you don't lose it when we close out the Zoom. But again, we appreciate you all being here, and we can't thank you enough for what you do and the huge impact it makes on the students, not only in our area, but their students and so on. So if you will just take a moment and click on the link that John has dropped here and take our evaluative survey, we appreciate you, and we hope you have an awesome summer filled with lots of sunshine, unicorns, rainbows, and so on and so forth. So everybody deserves it. So thanks.
And thank you all for being here. Yes, and ditto to what Tracy just said. We do hope that you have an awesome summer because you definitely deserve it. And if anyone needs any help with the survey, just reach out and we can get you that link.